Well, welcome everybody. I am Jan Jeremias and welcome to Pets, People, Life and Longevity. And I'm here with my friend and canine companion, Tonka. And so a little bit about me. I'm a trained scientist who began exploring holistic and alternative healing about 18 years ago. I began my journey with the use of essential oils and began exploring things like Reiki, gentle massage, and other modalities for pets and people too. I do work with people occasionally. I'm the co-author of the top-selling essential oil book, Spoil Your Pet, A Practical Guide to Using Essential Oils in Dogs and Cats. And today I'm really excited to have join me. We've had a lot of health stuff. We've had other stuff, but today we get to chat with my new friend, Shannon. So welcome, Shannon Riley-Coyner, who's from Ventura, California. And I'll tell you a little bit about her, and then we'll get started having our conversation. And we'll go back to what she does a little bit more. So she's a speaker and best-selling author. She's a dog trainer for over 30 years, 30. She has a degree in biology, specializing in zoology. She's a registered veterinary technician, which I love because it kind of combines the behavior with the more medical side of it. She's a certified professional dog trainer, a Karen Pryor Academy certified training partner, a member of the Association of Pet Dog Trainers, and a member of the International Association of Animal Behavior Consultants. And she is an author, a published author of the book, The Evolution of Dog Training, which I feel like now I have to pick up because I'm like so curious about what it says. Well, welcome.
Thank you. I know it's kind of crazy. I was on a podcast the other day and somebody said 30. Am I saying this right? And I'm like, yes, I know. I literally was a teenager when I started this journey. So thank you for having me.
Oh, no, thank you. So I want to jump right in and I want to ask you, so you said you've been doing this for 30 years and you started as a teenager. So I wanted to find out for our listeners to find out how you got started, why, you're a little bit about your history, and then maybe, you ended up being a vet tech. And I think now you left that and you do all training. So I want to find out a little bit about that transition.
Yeah. So when I always have been an animal person, as many people who are animal people, you just gravitate to animals when you're young, and had Staffordshire Bull Terriers when I was growing up, but they didn't really get a lot of training. They had a lot of behavior problems like separation anxiety that I didn't understand at the time. But then when my two, though, they passed away. One was only 3 months older than me. So, I literally grew up with him. They passed away and family was looking to get something else. Sort of on impulse, we ended up with a yellow lab. But I was a teenager then. I was in high school, 15, 16 years old. And I was determined that I was going to train her and make sure she was good. And I went to a training class and they put choke chains and pinch collars. And even as a teenager, I didn't like it. But I was an obedient teenager. So I did what I had to do, but practice like crazy outside of class so that my dog would eventually be off leash. That was my goal. Cause I'm like, if she can be off leash, she can wear that choke chain like a necklace, but I don't have to use it. And that started me really exploring positive reinforcement before it was even a thing. I was using treats, but I didn't know exactly what I was doing. It was all made up by me, but I thought I wanted to be a vet, went to Sonoma State to be pre-vet. Halfway through, freaked out, said, I don't want to go to vet school. I don't know what to do. But at the time I was working in zoos as on the weekends and evenings. And I met a vet tech at a zoo who I said, now that's what I want to do. I was doing some behavior in the zoos, but I also loved being the nurse. So after I graduated from Sonoma State, I went and got my AA. So I did it backwards. I got my BA and then my AA. In veterinary technology, and then became a vet tech, and still had that desire for training. Had some dogs by this point. I was married. I had some of my own dogs that I was trying training. And at the vet hospital I worked at, they were super open to me doing all my crazy creative ideas. And I said, we need to start doing puppy class. This was in the 90s. I said, we need to do puppy class. It'll bring in clients. It'll be good for the puppies. I was in Napa in Northern California. So I had the benefit of having Ian Dunbar literally down the freeway in Berkeley. So I followed his serious at the beginning dog training program, and then had Gene Donaldson and Trish McCon. I mean, there was just it was a hotbed for positive reinforcement. So that's kind of how I got into training. Was I was doing some private stuff, but the puppy class and the socialization. And then I just kept growing from there. Went to a veterinary conference, met Karen Overall, and she became my worship because I call her the godmother of behavior and veterinary medicine. So she sort of started us moving to positive training. I learned that was where I learned aggression does not treat aggression. So when you have fearful, anxious dogs, at that time we didn't call them that. We just said aggressive dogs. But she was starting to teach these dogs are aggressive because it's a symptom of them being fearful and anxious and stressed.
So I want to ask a question because I feel like maybe for some of our listeners, why don't you differentiate for us what positive reinforcement training is, so people have a better idea of what that means?
So I'll use the most common words. Traditional training is what we kind of call how we used to train dogs, which I'll explain in a second. And then positive reinforcement, there's force-free, more scientific-based training. So traditional training came from, 100 years ago. We needed to train dogs for wars in Germany. And we started using choke chains because at that time, the belief was we had to dominate dogs. We had to be alpha. We had to be in control. We had to exert our alphaness or our dominance over them. So that was using choke chains, pinch collars, some shock collars. That came a little bit later, more commonly, where if your dog did something you didn't like, you quote unquote pop them, which was like a punishment. So you made the choke chain or pinch collar tighter around their neck with the idea that the dog would learn that that was something they shouldn't do and they should avoid doing that. So in psychology, we call that positive punishment because you add something to decrease a behavior. So you're adding pain to decrease a behavior. So then dogs would say, okay, well, I'm not going to pull on leash because it hurts my neck, theoretically. And so then they would not pull. And the problem with traditional training, which is now what it's commonly called, is our timing is really terrible. So like a dog would do something wrong and it takes us time to react. So our brain has to process, oh, I don't want my dog to do that. Now I'm going to correct my dog. Well, that could be 3 to 5 to 10 seconds later. And now you're popping the dog, punishing the dog. And now the dog's like, and there was lots of confusion. Some dogs, dogs learn. It is a method that quote unquote works. But what we started to learn as we studied dog psychology and really paying more attention to what was happening as side effects is this old school training was causing stress and trauma, just like you can imagine as a human. If I'm constantly telling you no, 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 but I never tell you what I want you to do, you're going to really struggle in the world to figure out, well, this is good, this is bad. All you're going to know is all these things are bad. Plus the timing has been off. So now they say sit and you sit, but you were slower than they wanted you. So now they pop you while you're sitting. You don't know if you did that right or not. Like, it's super confusing. So the science started changing in the 30s, but it took a little while with clickers. There was some changing. There was some little bit of change going on. Bob Bailey, they were using clickers or sound effects, kind of like we used with whales and whistles. And we were trying to reinforce what we liked. So instead of watching our dog or our animal, I don't like this, I don't like this, I don't like this, we're like, oh, I like that. Oh, I like that. Maybe that wasn't perfect, but it's on the right track. And then we started what we call shaping. So, little increments of improvement, kind of like we learn better as humans. When you learn to drive, they don't just throw you on the busiest freeway in town and hope you do it. You go through classes, you learn in increments. And so you gradually build upon your learning. So then the shift started happening. And then where we were going towards positive reinforcement. And that is where, like, Karen Overall was a great impact to me, because at that time, aggressive dogs were considered, they weren't respecting you. They were trying to be dominant over you. They were trying to be alpha. So we were punishing these dogs and they were getting worse. And so Karen overall was just great. And she said, aggression doesn't treat aggression. And I, at that time, now I say it like, oh, of course. But I was like, whoa, my mind was blown by this one seminar. And I already had been doing obedience training with like cheese and, trying to figure out how to reinforce positive what I liked. But looking at it from the standpoint of anxiety, fear, and stress. And if I'm stressed and anxious and somebody tells me to shut up, don't be anxious, stop it, or physically tries to stop me from being anxious, that doesn't stop me from being anxious. It just makes me more anxious. So that's where traditional training is what we've always done. It's all we knew. Dogs haven't been studied for all that long in reality. In my career, dogs, the beginning of my career, we didn't study dogs. There were all kinds of excuses why we didn't study dogs, but now we're studying dogs. We know they have very similar emotions to us. We know they have oxytocin, they have dopamine, they have all these same chemicals as us. Their brain fires the same as us. Like when dogs have been trained to put their head in MRI machines, sit still, awake, and their loved one comes in comes in the room, and the part of their brain that's a child would respond to a mother responds to dogs. So we started learning like we can't treat them as, it's not apples and oranges anymore. I mean, we are a little more apples to apples in our how we feel. And so just like parenting has shifted a lot from punishment-based parenting, spanking, rulers, that kind of thing, and teaching. Dog training. Now, dog training is behind parenting, but it is moving in the right direction. So when we talk about traditional, that's more what the world would consider punishment, where when you look at positive reinforcement, it's reinforcing things that we like, so they do it more. Because if you get reinforced for something, you want to do it more. So if you get paid to go to your job, you're going to go the next day. If you didn't get paid, or you got yelled at and you didn't get paid, then you're not going to go the next day. And so it gets us moving in that right way. Then there's been a bigger shift of force-free, which used to be positive reinforcement, meant you still might make dogs do certain things. And then force-free is really even taking in the next level, where you have to be more creative on how can I get this dog to go in this crate that doesn't want to go without, forcing them in, but convincing them. And that takes a little more creativity sometimes, because as humans, we just want to control everything. And it lets our learner have more control of the learning process. So,
well, I'm assuming also that as humans, especially in the West, we're used to the things happening very quickly. And something like that requires so much, that might require more time. People are like, I don't have time for this. Like just get in the crate. Like
they just want the magic pill, like exactly like you've seen with oils, like they want the magic pill. And just do it. And that was always our caveat, like, oh, well, positive training takes longer than the traditional training, but it's better. But in some things, it doesn't take longer. It actually is faster in some training and some situations, because smart dogs, I just had a new client yesterday. This dog, like, it took like 3 times for it to figure out what I wanted. And he had never been trained that way before, but he was like, oh, if I sit, I get a treat. Awesome. I can do that. Where he had been saying, oh, I'm struggling with him sitting fast. Like I say sit, and he like thinks about it for 5 minutes and then sits. And once he figured out that if I said sit, he got a treat, it was like, oh yeah,
I'm all over this.
I'll do that. And then you get the dog who's like, can I sit? Can I get a treat now? If I sit, can I get a treat now? And I'd rather have you offering all those things that I want than really worrying about, am I going to get hurt if I do this? I don't want my dogs to have that relationship with me.
Well, and I think that it's interesting, because as I think about treating, I mean, Tonka would never have an issue if food's involved, but I'm sure it must get a little bit more challenging when you have a dog that's not food motivated.
Yes. And that it comes up a lot. And food, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times dogs that are not food motivated, quote unquote, it's actually because they're afraid and they're anxious. Because one of the things that happens with dogs and other animals too, just like it happens with us, is if we get afraid, our appetite goes down. Our fight, flight, and freeze takes over, and our stomach is not hungry. And nothing sounds good. So that can definitely be a part where then I'm dealing with before we can do training, we have to decrease his anxiety. And that might be medication, that might be oils, that might be other things. But we bring that chemical imbalance down to a better level. So that is definitely one thing that you have to think about with food motivation.
Well, I'm really interested in the anxiety level. And I thought maybe we could just go over what are some of the signs of anxiety in a dog. I think for me, maybe I've been around enough animals to recognize it, but I don't know that everybody knows. And I think there are some signs people don't necessarily look for.
100%. And it's one of the things I educate every single client, whether you're in a class with me or you're in a private. I do education on body language. I feel like every human on the planet that interacts with dogs or cats or whatever should understand the body language, because that's the way animals communicate. They don't talk. They're not communicating like this. We have to understand their body language, whether it's horses, cats, or dogs. For dogs, since that's the most common animal that we interact with, that we have to deal with this, is a lot of times people understand cowering. They sunk down. Maybe they understand ears going back means fear, but not everybody recognizes that ears pinned back against their head. Tail tucked. Usually people know if their tail's tucked. But what things people don't know is a dog can be wagging their tail and they could be anxious. How they wag the tail, the speed they wag the tail, how high the level of the tail is. And you can't just look at the tail. You got to look at facial features. So is the jowl soft and relaxed, or is it like a really tight smile? Are their eyes big and wide, or are they weemy and relaxed like they're about to fall asleep? Things that people don't recognize that I every day educate. Yawning can be a sign of stress. So if they're stressed, they're yawning a lot. People think they're tired, but they're actually stressed. Licking their lips, like just real small, not like slurps, like, oh, I just had a big glass of a big water or food, but like little licking their lips, super common. That people don't recognize. Full body shakes, like they're wet, but they're not, can be a sign they've had stress. Sniffing excessively, scratching excessively when you're like, okay, you don't have fleas, you don't have this, chewing their paws. Those are places where people get mixed up with allergies versus anxiety. So there's a lot of different things, but looking at their body language is super important.
Well, that is really important. And I think that, the more we can read those signs, obviously, the better, the less, I want to say, negative things that can happen. So, totally. Is learning those signs and saying, okay, well, he's afraid of that dog over there or that person over there for some reason that maybe I don't understand totally, especially when you look at somebody and they might not look dangerous or they look normal, quote unquote.
Yes.
Or another pet. And and just saying, okay, well, they have to get used to each other. Now is not the time for some reason. Yeah.
And I always tell people, fear does not make sense. It doesn't make sense to humans sometimes, and it doesn't make sense to dogs. So I have a friend who is afraid of snakes. She's never been bit by a snake. She's never been hurt by snakes, but if we're on a hike, she freaks out if we come across a snake. I have another friend who was born in Colorado, lives now here in Ventura, coastal. If the tide is out, we've never had a tsunami. But if the tide is out too far and we're walking on the beach, she starts to have panic that we're going to have a tsunami. Totally does not make sense. But that's how fear is. Now, sometimes we have fear because we got in a car accident, so that intersection's scary, or we were bit by a dog, so dogs are scary, or something like that. And so sometimes dogs are afraid of people, places, or things, not because there's anything bad's happened. That's where people, a lot of times, a rescue dog will come in. Oh, he must have been abused. I see so many dogs that I know their whole childhood never been abused, but they weren't socialized. Genetics plays a big part now. We're learning the more and more genetics plays a big part in fear and anxiety. How they were socialized before they were 6 months old. And then trauma plays a piece. If they were mowed down by a dog, even if it wasn't it. I had one client whose dog that dog played too rough, and she got hit and rolled down a hill, and she was afraid of dogs after that for a little while because she didn't know what to expect. So fear makes a huge, it doesn't make sense, but it can be anything.
And I think just changing behavior, because I know I moved last year And
Mhm.
Tonka, my dog, has never had an issue with any dog. Ever. Was always a dog's dog, would play with anything. And when we moved, all of a sudden, like he growled at a few dogs. And it was the
Mhm.
first week we were there. And I think it was the move, it was the unpacking, it was all these strange people in the house. It was a new neighborhood. We'd only lived in the same house for all the time since he's been alive.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it was totally different. Plus I was anxious because of all
Yes.
that happening. And so then all of a sudden I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like it was like, I should have realized this, but all of a sudden I was like, all these changes, like that's a
We
lot for
call that,
him.
yeah, trigger stacking. So what happened, and what I explain to people is, the day that your alarm didn't go off, so you're running late for work, and you like back out of your car, and you have your coffee between your legs, and your coffee spills all over your white pants, but you don't have time to stop. So you go home, you go to work, you hit every single red light, you walk into the office, and your boss is like, I need to see you in the office. Those are those days we wish we had just stayed in bed. That's trigger stacking, because when you talk to that boss after all that, you may be more reactive. You may break down into tears. You're going to be emotionally overloaded. And sometimes it comes out fight. Sometimes it comes out flight. Sometimes it comes out freeze. It can be all those things. And so your dog was like, there are so many changes in my life right now. I can't deal with one more thing. And those dogs were one more thing. And if you start to empty the cup, tell my clients a lot, think of anxiety as a cup sometimes. And if you keep filling it without it draining, eventually it's going to overflow. And so you have to drain that cup a little bit to handle these new environments.
Right. And so afterwards, once that was like, I mean, obviously it didn't take me long to get that to register, thankfully. But
Yeah.
then I was like, okay, well, I've got to give him time. I've got to give him space. I have to let him adjust, all those different things. And I think it was just this realization for me of all
Mm-hmm.
the change that had happened. And, and I now tell the same when I talk to people, let's say, who are getting ready to go on vacation and take their pets.
Mm-hmm.
I tell them the same thing. Like, don't assume that your dog is going to behave the same if you're on vacation, wherever you go, compared to the way you act at home.
Exactly. And if they've never gone on trips, like I have clients who are like, I'm going to take my dog on a camping, and they've never camped in 10 years of their life. I'm like, well, have you gone to day camp before? Have you gone to new parks? Have you hiked at new places? How does your dog do in new places? Some dogs are like some people, bring it on. The more the adventure, the better. But then some dogs are like, I'm really happy in my house and I'm totally introverted and I don't really want to go on your vacation. you know?
I had this conversation with somebody who was taking a trip. And so she was, she found a pet friendly hotel. And
Mm-hmm.
I said to her, well, first of all, take a crate. I said,
Mm-hmm.
because your dog may not be destructive at home because it's in its normal environment. But I said, the last thing you want is to rent any place or be in a hotel and have him destroy something because all of a sudden it's not home. And I
For
said,
sure.
personally, I wouldn't leave him like, I wouldn't leave him alone,
Yep. Yep.
especially depending on how long you're going to be away for any extended period of time. I said, because it is a new place, you
People
know.
don't think about that at all when they go. Like if I take my dogs on a trip, they're going to be with,
Me
I'm
too.
planning a trip where they're going to hike. We're hiking. We're not, if I'm going to leave them somewhere, I'm leaving them in the car while I maybe go get dinner. But I don't ever plan a trip where I plan on leaving my dogs alone in an environment they've never been in before, in a hotel or an Airbnb or something like that. It's, it's scary for them because they don't understand we're going to be right back.
That's
They
right.
don't, yeah. They just know you took them to a new place and now you've left. So, so I mean, there are the dogs who travel a lot, they're used to that experience, but a dog who has not, may not be able to handle
Yeah.
that.
So one of the things you touched upon and you mentioned with one of your dogs growing up, and also I think now, especially with a lot of COVID pets. So everybody was so used to, all our pets were very used to us being home all day.
Yep.
And now as life gets back to a little bit more routine and people navigate, all of a sudden all our pets are left at home all day,
Yes.
which personally I think they look at and think to themselves, well, I didn't bargain for this, I
Well,
didn't.
and that is again, it's getting them used to things, and COVID, everybody was home, like everybody got pets, cleared the shelters, and they were home all the time. And if I could get a hold of people, I was like, I want you going to the grocery store or any of those errands you need to do during COVID without you, because people were also taking their dogs everywhere in the car. Your dog needs to get used to being left alone. Go walk. I was telling some people, walk around the block without your dog. Like, get them used to you not being in the house, because separation anxiety is just that. They get used. Some dogs are more prevalent to it, are more, predisposed to do it, and some are not. But if they're used to being with you all the time, and then all of a sudden you leave, it's like really traumatic for some dogs. They don't really know how to be on their own. Some of these dogs are what I call Velcro dogs too. So they're used to you telling them, chew on that bone. Here's this ball. I'll play with you. They never learned independence or confidence being alone anyway. And it does become a big problem. And if they don't nip it right in the bud, it can become probably the most difficult behavior to change, because it usually requires medications, and it requires, different kinds of supplements, training plans. You can't just rip the Band-Aid off, because it doesn't make separation anxiety better. If you just say, well, forget it, I'm going back to work 40 hours a week, he's just going to have to deal. You could come home to a completely destroyed house. I have a whole webinar, and some of the videos and the pictures that I use, dogs chewing holes through doors. I have experience as a vet tech. We had a client whose dog went through their front window, like literally jumped through the window, was running around the neighborhood, scratches everywhere because embedded glass, because they just did that. They had been home and then they went back to work, and this was years ago. And the dog had to be on medication. They had to find daycare, and daycare wasn't a thing then. So it was a real challenge. And this my heart just sinks, and I feel so bad for these dogs, because it's like they have a partner all the time, and then the partner literally is gone, almost like a death. I mean, where you don't have that companion all the time. So it can be really tough.
What about one thing we didn't mention, but it just came into my mind, was health issues and anxiety, like dog behavior and health issues? Because I think I sometimes I look at it, and I think that after you're with your pets for a long period of time, you can tell when they don't feel well.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, I always tell people, when you have drastic behavior changes, think about take them to the vet first.
Oh, that's something, as a dog trainer who's a vet tech, it's one of the things that is like my little niche, at least in Ventura, the area. I don't know if there's anybody else who has my same degrees. So I get a lot of dogs. A dog just recently came to me, and been from another city. Pit bull was really having trouble on walks at the old stand, and they were doing treats and they were doing all these things. Then they moved to Ventura, and they lived close to the beach, where they had to go up and down stairs to go to the bath for the dog to go to the bathroom. And the walks were getting harder and harder. So we are doing our evaluation, and the dog isn't showing any extreme limping or anything. And I always observe them freely. They have my yard while I'm talking to the client. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw him lift a leg up, like do a little hitch in the giddy up kind of thing. And I'm like, said, before we do a lot, I think you need to get x-rays for this dog, because I'm concerned that there's something with the knees or the hips going on. The vet actually wrote me an email saying, thank you so much, that the dog had severe hip dysplasia. So for years, trainers were trying to teach him to be a better walker, walk faster, walk longer. Thought it was stubbornness and willfulness, and it was hip dysplasia. Same thing if a dog out of the blue starts urinating or defecating in the house, and they were potty trained before I'll even see them, they need to get a urinalysis and get checked out. If they were never aggressive, and now all of a sudden they're aggressive when you pet them, or they're aggressive when they jump up on the couch. I'll always say, let's check, out. I have 2 bulldogs I'm working with right now that I think have very strange gaits. They're bulldogs, so they already have a strange gait. They're older. They've been fighting recently within the last 6 months. I think one or both of them have some arthritis or joint disease. The owner won't follow through with x-rays, so we are just trying to manage what we can. But I don't think that's going to just get progressively worse, because if the medical problem isn't addressed, just like, if I have a bladder infection or kidney infection, don't tell me to stop going into the bathroom, because that's not going to, it hurts, if we are injured, we have, break something, we can be grouchy. because we hurt
That's
or we're
right.
sick. We're tired. We got to get that better before we can deal with the behavior symptoms.
Right. And, I had that conversation with my cousin recently who had a dog that all of a sudden became aggressive. And I said to him, I would take the dog to the vet. Like, first thing was what I said. I said, I would rule out the fact that there's anything medical. It might not be medical at all, but you might as well know that it's not medical. And then you can
Exactly.
address the other stuff that happens. And
Exactly.
I'm not saying one's easier, like, because I actually think some of the emotional issues are harder to deal with
For sure.
than the physical issues. But
exactly. If you can take some anti-inflammatories or something, if it's, but you go with the behavior issue. But if you don't address, if there is a medical issue, pain, whatever, you'll just be wasting your time and your money trying to fix that behavior if the medical issue is causing behavior to happen. For sure. And that happens with cognitive, as dogs get older, too, they start having dementia, or they start having, problems. And I had a Cocker Spaniel once that had been getting along with the cat fine, out of the blue started acting weird. But he was also telling me about all these little random weird things that were happening. Unfortunately, when I had them go back to the vet that they worked with didn't believe in cognitive disorder of dogs, even though I gave them a whole printout of these are all the symptoms. I highlighted everything that we were seeing, because I said, this is what we're seeing. This is why I want this checked out. And so then they came back, and the vet wouldn't do anything for it. So then we just had to do management. And I just kept in my head that I was looking at a dog with dementia probably. So I'm not going to, my expectations changed. I'm not going to expect him to be able to go here. I'm going to manage the situation rather than try to teach something new.
Yeah, that's where my world started, when I had a dog that had dementia. And definitely knew that it was a thing.
Yeah.
And that it was really, that it does happen.
Yes.
And you just have to, they're old. You work with them around whatever that issue is that they're having. For her, it was insomnia, and extremely, she could stand in the backyard for 20 minutes and not budge. And then I would remind her to go to the bathroom, and then she would go. But she would just stand there and space out.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. They get stuck in corners. And something, since we're talking about dogs with dementia and cognitive disorder, sometimes an early sign you see is mild anxiety, but people don't perceive it as anxiety because they walk around panting. They pace a little bit, they walk around the house and they're panting, and it's not hot. They haven't exercised. But the pant is another one of those signs of anxiety when it's not hot, or I've seen that in dogs where they just don't settle, and people think they're just being a pain. They're just being attention seeking. But the dog's having trouble with dementia.
Yeah. I think that is it's a very interesting. And I think that there are definite things, to me, you can do to prevent as they age, like things like there are supplements you can do that's just like us, which help with, as we age better.
Yes.
And diet plays a huge role, and supplementation to me plays a huge role that can prevent in those things. And then just normal stimulation, just we talk about ourselves and brain function, and boredom isn't good.
I have to tell almost every client about mental stimulation, because I'm like, your dog gets a bowl of food in the morning and a bowl of food at night, and then you maybe take them on a walk in the morning and night, and then they sit around, do nothing all day. Instead of feeding meals out of bowls, put them in food puzzles. And if you're home or you have the opportunity to do it 4 times a day rather than twice a day, divide that. They eat a cup a day, give a quarter at breakfast, a quarter midday, a quarter in the afternoon, and 1 in the evening. Make them search for their food. Give them Kongs. Give them toys that
I started giving Kongs again recently, and I actually freeze them. So
yes, they last longer.
They last longer. It takes them a super long time. It's and getting it all out, because it's a Kong and it's kind of whatever takes him a while, and usually he's exhausted afterwards.
Kongs are the best too, because no matter what food you give, you can put it in a Kong. So a kibble can be put in with chicken broth or beef broth or something like that, and it can be soaked in. You can put it. If you do raw, you can do that. If you do canned, you can do that. If, you can put a little peanut butter in there as dessert. You can put a little cheese in there, or cream cheese, or if they have a tummy ache and you're giving cottage cheese and rice or chicken and rice, you can put that in a Kong. That's what I love about Kongs is there's no food allergies problems. There's no dietary restriction problems, and you can put anything in it.
And the other reason I like it is because if you have a fast eater, so if you have a dog that inhales their food, especially because I freeze it, it takes him a very long time to get through that. So he's eating it like over a period of time versus, I mean, yes, I've done slow feeding and stuff stuff like that.
Anything that makes them have to work and figure it out. I tell people, this kind of ages me a little bit, but I call it the Rubik's Cube, for dogs. It's like, sometimes, at least I think they're kind of making a comeback. So, but there was a period of time when I'd have young people look at me like, what's a Rubik's Cube? So sometimes I do that. I have dated myself with mailmen before and said, oh yeah, or newspaper delivery people. I'll be like, oh, the dog could go get the newspaper on the driveway. And they're like, what are you talking about? So sometimes I age myself, but I call it a Rubik's Cube, because it's like crossword puzzle. It's mentally stimulates them, keeps them thinking. They have to figure out, problem solve, all these things and they do it without you. So it creates independence. It creates confidence. It gives them something to do. They become a little more self-reliant rather than always needing you to be the one who provides everything. And as humans, we're healthier if we're more independent. When we're too codependent, when we are too, dependent on someone, there can be a lot of side effects that are negative for that. So this food toys have so many amazing values to keep people, for dogs.
Well, we could chat forever.
For sure.
I think we'll have you back because we'll have to think of something else to talk about. But I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. It's such a great conversation.
You are so welcome, and I love it. And I'm so passionate about dogs and making their lives better. And so I love being able to talk to you because you have that same passion too.
And I'm sure my listeners will enjoy it. And when I provide, I'll give a little description about who you are. And then when I post on my website, people have the ability to see how to get in touch with you.
Awesome.
Oh, but one question I have before you go, where can people get your book?
Amazon is the main place. Amazon, because, you can do it locally, but Amazon is easy to get it. So they can and it's in written, so they can get paperback, they can get ebook, and audio is available now.
Oh, okay, cool. Oh, great.
That was my COVID project. That if I ever did audio again, I'd rent a studio and get it done in a week and not try to do it myself like that. It was it's a project, but we got it done. So so it's available in all of those forms.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you again. And I look forward to reaching everybody very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Pets, People, Life, and Longevity, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can catch every episode at exvadio.com/podcasts, the Apple Podcast app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Amazon Music, Audible, and wherever you find podcasts.